evening. Henry Ford once mentioned anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. Our guest for tonight, Miss Carrie Sue, is a perfect example of learning and teaching and has just absorbed the above quote in her life. Carrie is a master storyteller, has been connecting curriculum, people, languages, and cultures in both English and Spanish for over 35 years. Performing in diverse avenues, she is a Kautukwa scholar as well as, I might be wrong with the pronunciations, she will definitely correct it for me, as well as a Kennedy Center and Wolf Trap trained teaching artist. She believes that if you don't know the trees, you may be lost in the forest, but if you don't know the stories, you may be lost in life. An advocate for the art of storytelling and arts education, her awards include National Storytelling Network Oracle Award for Service and Leadership, Sun Award for Advancing Teaching and Learning Through the Arts, Florida Storytelling Association's Chuck Plung Distinguished Service Award, Broward Teaching Artist Arts Ed Forever Award, a National Parenting Publication Honors Award, iParenting Award for Tell Me a Story CD, an endorsed master training artist for the South Florida Cultural Consortium, an alliance of the local arts agencies from 5 South Florida countries. In 2019, she was one of only 4 recipients of the National Residency Teaching Artist Credential, which recognizes the skills and experiences of exemplary school based residency teaching artists in the United States. Let's welcome Carrie, ma'am. Good evening and
Namaste.
namaste. How are you?
Namaste. Good evening. Such a pleasure to be here.
Same here. It's always a pleasure to have you on board.
I feel the
So,
same.
this show is all about your journey from scratch to star, where you started, how you started, and what motivated to be what you are today. So,
Well,
you have been a vivid viewer of nearly all of our series till date, and with your expert comments, we have really liked whatever you've asked or whatever you've commented. So I would not waste time, but and just start. How did you take up storytelling as a teaching art? What motivated you to be Carrie Sue that you are today?
it's a wonderful question. It really gets us to stop to think about it, going, ¿cómo empecé? How did I really start? And it was in Mexico, in Mexico. Well, that's when I decided to become a professional storyteller. But if you ever ask my mother, she would probably tell you I've been doing it all my life, at least in one form or another. I started by escuchando, by listening to stories first. I was one of those really, really lucky children. I had storytellers all around me. We all have stories. Every one of us has a story to tell and to listen to if we're lucky. But I was one of those fortunate ones where all around me, I had wonderful storytellers. My parents, of course, who are usually our first storytellers, my grandparents, my teachers. But it was my grandparents that were probably the biggest influence. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the north of the United States, northeast. And it's cold up there. But I would come down to Florida where my grandparents were. Most people, they come down to Florida for the winter when it's cold up north and to warm up. Not my family, not me. You see, we would come down every summer. The day school let out in the summer, like in June, we would come down for almost 3 months and not return until early September when school was going to start again. My parents had their own business and worked very long summer hours. So we spent, my siblings and I, every summer at my grandparents' house. They were storytellers. My grandmother would tell us every night, where would you like to go tonight? You want to go to visit India? You want to go to Australia, Poland, France? I thought she had been all around the world. It turns out she was just well read, but she knew the folk tales. I'll tell you more a little bit about my grandma Selma in just a bit. She was a big influence on me and still is. And then there was my grandpa Nat. My grandpa Nat was one of the finest storytellers that I've ever heard to this very day. And I know some amazing, fabulous storytellers. And every lesson we ever learned was through a story. He, like his father and grandfather before him, were Talmudic scholars as well as businessmen. And if I was having a fight with my brothers and sisters, he might tell us the Aesop's fable about the bundle of sticks. Whereas, the father that was tired of the children fighting would say, you, get me a stick. Their father, who had never hit them ever, the children couldn't believe it. But he was telling them to bring them a stick, and they knew they were in big trouble. They all brought him the stick. He tied it into a big bundle, and when it was thick with it, he handed it to each child in turn and said, break it. Well, they all tried. You know how siblings complete with one another. They tried and they tried, but no one could break that bundle of sticks. Then he untied it, gave each one their sticks back, and said, now break it. Well, they were easily snapped in half. And that's when their father said, you see, that is how it is in life. Juntos, unidos, together, united, somos fuertes, we are strong. Pero separados, separately, easy to break. And those would be the kind of stories my grandfather would tell us. Now, he never told me what the moral of the story is. We had to figure it out. So I always learned through stories. But when I went off to college, I went to study in Cholula, Puebla, Mexico, at the University of the Americas. I wanted to learn Spanish. I wanted to learn more about the culture down there. And I found a second home, which I ended up staying. I met my husband down there. But when I got down there, amongst all the other changes were I discovered well-read people. A lot of my other fellow students, even from here in the United States and from all over, because people really came from all over to study there, had heard stories, or I'm sorry, had read stories, but never heard them. They didn't know the oral art form. And it's not the same thing. And I was shocked. I don't know why I was so shocked, but I was. I'll never forget walking across campus. And it was sometime in the middle of that school year. It was a beautiful, warm, sunny day. And I remember walking across the greens and looking up the mountains and thinking to myself, those poor deprived people, those young people who have never heard the art of storytelling. That's what I'm going to be. I had my aha moment, my epiphany. I knew I was going to be a professional storyteller. The only problem was I had never actually met or heard of anyone making a living doing that. But the good news is, whenever you're going to pioneer in any field, there's no one to tell you you're doing it all wrong. Of course, the downside of it is there's no one to tell you you're doing it all wrong. So I made lots of errors and mistakes along the way. But it's like Einstein said, if you've never made a mistake, it's because you've never tried anything new. But I knew even at that time, at barely 18 years old, I knew what my path was going to be. I knew how it could be used. Storytelling could be used in business, in healthcare, and in education. And that's how I started. I knew right then and there. Of course, I had to figure out my way to create the path. And I also knew that I was going to be able to use it in education, in teaching, because stories were actually hardwired, we now know, from all the science studies, the brain studies of the last 20 years. We are hardwired as human beings to understand and remember things through narrative, through story. And then I later on became a teaching artist where I could use my stories, not just for entertainment, but to teach a lesson, to integrate the curriculum. And of course, at that time, this is a while ago, well over 35 years, closer to 40 now, I realized the other day, there was not many people in that field. We didn't even call ourselves teaching artists at that time. I think we were barely starting to call us as artists in education. But again, when you're going to pioneer in any field, you'll make lots of mistakes, but you'll learn a lot along the way. So that's how I started. And it's interesting because my view of how to use the stories hasn't really changed since I was 18.
And in fact, your art of teaching is really very beneficial. I want to know, why do you call it art of teaching?
Well, both storytelling is an art, it's a performing art, and it is now recognized here in the United States as a fine art, finally. It's been recognized as a folk art for decades and decades, but it's only, oh, I think it was maybe 6 years ago that it was finally recognized as a separate fine art form. But it's, as a third grader once told me, I thought this was the best definition I've ever heard. And I want to credit him. A third grader once said to me, "Oh, Miss Carrie Sue, thank you. Thank you for painting those pictures in my mind." And I went, "That's it." Rather than using a pencil or even a paintbrush, what I do through my voice, my words, my face and body is paint the story and the pictures of those stories in my listeners' minds when I'm successful. And that's when we can use that as an art form to share information, ideas, get us to stop and think, creative, as well as critical thinking skills. And the art of teaching is very much the same thing. It's never rote, it's not just reading something off the page. Think about it for just a second. Almost anyone who's been fortunate to go to school and have at least one really excellent teacher will remember them for the rest of their lives. They're very impactful. We'll also remember some of the ones that weren't so great, but we'll remember more. Those teachers that connected with us, touched us, changed the way we saw something or thought about something. And they stay with us forever. They're like gems.
Yes, no doubt they are gems. Ma'am, I want to, though I know there have never been such, as much as I know about you, there have never been anything termed as an obstacle in your life.
There's
Uh,
lots of obstacles.
that's what I'm coming to. That's what I'm coming to. Could you share some experiences of the obstacles that blocked your way, but you kicked them ahead and moved ahead?
Absolutely, because it's not the obstacles in our life, it's not even the stumbling over them, I believe. It's what we do with it when we get past them or through them or with them and carry them on. I think about so many. My first obstacle was, well, number one, I was living in another country. I decided that I'm going to be a storyteller, and now I had to learn to do it in a second language. So that was number one. Also, I had to figure out, make a pathway that I did not know. I had no GPS for where I was going to go in this career. I had known storytellers all my life, but not a single one who had ever made their living doing it. I came up with this, it was the school year 1974-75. Now, ironically, the National Storytelling Festival here in the United States had started in 1973, but I had not yet heard about it over in Jonesboro, Tennessee. I wouldn't even hear about it because I was living in Mexico for another couple of years. But it's a wonderful event. And this year went online and you could see it from wherever you were. It's a wonderful event. But at that time, I had never heard of it or any other ones. So I had to create my own pathway. And it's hard to know what direction you're going to go. But I knew what my values were, I knew why I was doing it. And as for the second language, well, I was inspired by that grandmother that I talked about, my grandma Selma. She was a big influence, as was my grandpa Nat. They were wonderful storytellers, and both of them had come to the United States in the late 1890s, or my grandmother actually in 1900. She came to the country when she was 9 years old, and she already spoke five languages. Mhm. Unfortunately, not one of them was English. Mhm. She did not speak a single word. I don't think she had even heard hello, how are you before she got here. But like every immigrant child, to whatever country you're going to, she learned. She learned, in fact, she arrived in the spring, and by the time school started in the fall, she was already translating for her parents. She became so fluent in English, people didn't realize she hadn't even been born here. So now she had six languages she was fluent in. And when she was 92, my husband and my toddler son and I moved back from Mexico to move in with her to help her. She was having some health issues at 92. We wanted to help her so she could stay in her own home. And at 92, she decided she was going to study Spanish. There were some who really wondered about that. They asked her, Selma, why at your age you're going to start studying Spanish now? And her answer was, and if not now, when? I should wait till I'm 100? Well, I thought, yes, I want to be just like her, always learning, always growing. And at 92, she learned by learning songs and nursery rhymes with my son, who was learning to speak anyways. But she was one of my inspirations. Let me give you a little example. Since I'm a storyteller, the way I remember things is through story, both personal, like this one with my grandmother, and folkloric. The reason folk tales and folklore work and are long remembered and passed all around the world is because they are so effective and they're fun too. That same grandmother is the one who taught me, my grandma Selma taught me, our stories fit in any size suitcase. They can go with you wherever we go. So in honor of her, I'd like to share a very short story, a folk tale that I think about often because it's what helped me remember that I could learn it and learn about a new language, a new culture, or even new ideas, no matter where I am or at any age. Había una vez, once there was un ratoncito, a little mouse. Ratoncito lived in the very best neighborhood, his little mouse hole. That's right, in a, right on the side of una cocina, a kitchen. And you notice, by the way, you can understand both the Spanish and English because I go back and forth. And it's about connecting, communicating. Well, this little mouse knew to communicate. His abuelita, his grandma, had taught him all kinds of things, including to look out to see what food might have fallen so he would never be hungry. Well, that morning he woke up very hungry. His little pancita, his little tummy was going gru, gru, gru. And he looked out just like his abuelita, his grandma, had taught him. But he didn't see anything. As he looked to one side, to the other, but then he spied it right underneath la mesa, right underneath the table, the kitchen table. There was a large piece of queso cheese that had fallen off. Oh, ratoncito, he ran over, levantó queso, he picked up that cheese. It was so tasty. And just as he got that flavor in his mouth, escuchó, he heard, meow. Uh-oh, el gato, the cat. Well, he took that little piece of cheese, he threw it at the cat. Boom! He se fue corriendo. He went running as fast as he could back into his little mouse hole, back into safety. But Cat was right behind him. Cat snatched out, meow, shh, and missed. He had barely got back inside. But now he was in big trouble because you see, if he stayed inside, he could die of hunger. But if he went outside, he could die of the cat. Ooh. But then he remembered. He remembered some more of his grandmother's advice. And remembering her words, he gathered up all his strength. He got as close as he could to that little mouse hole door. And then that little ratoncito, that little mouse, he began to bark as loud as he could. Well, of course, as soon as that cat heard the barking, it took off running. It didn't even bother to see where the dog was coming from. And as that little mouse went out and picked up that cheese again, made his way back to the safety of his home, he thought, mi abuela tenía mucha razón. My grandmother was very right. Es bueno aprender otro idioma. Always good to learn a second language. Thank you, Grandma Selma. So that's how I learned some of those things through story. We always have obstacles. It might be because we're not sure where we're going. I don't know what I want to do. What do you want to do when you grow up? Well, unless we find out what the opportunities are, we don't know. Or we have to create our own. And then after I started to hone my skills as a storyteller and learned a second language, I had to start all over. I was just getting started with that in Mexico when we moved back to the United States to help my grandmother. So now I had to start all over again with in a new place and a new career, again in a new profession that I really wasn't sure of. And then I became a teaching artist because I started finding work as a professional storyteller. I sent out words, I honed my art form, my craft, but I always had this idea. I knew how powerful it could be in education. And you and I both know how important that is. It's not just what we read, it's the comprehension. It's do we understand it? Are we open to those new ideas? Einstein also said that knowledge is imagination is more important than knowledge. This was long before we had things that we could look up on the internet. We didn't have Google as a verb yet, but he knew how important it's not just the information, but what we do with it. And so then I had to discover how to become a teaching artist. And it was through experience and stretching out and trying new things, seeing what worked and making lots of mistakes along the way. But I'm happy to say that I've been doing the work for well over 40 years now as a storyteller, and nearly as long, or maybe about 40 years, as a teaching artist as well. So no matter what obstacles we have, and there's always going to be, we're going to come across it. I want to add one more thing about an obstacle. Even when we think we're on the way and I figured out the pathway, there's going to be something that we stumble over. We're going through this year with the worldwide pandemic. 4.5 years ago, was about that, I was in a major car accident. I was very lucky that I survived, and I am grateful each and every day. I actually am very grateful. I now realize how close I was to not being able to continue on with what I love to do and with my family. But I'm grateful I was not killed in that accident. I was not paralyzed, which was really quite miraculous too. I had some major injuries and I had to learn many things all over again, including how to walk again and do all those things for myself. I didn't drive for over 2 years, but I have a wonderful husband who drove me all over, and children and family and friends who took me to storytelling gigs as soon as I was able to walk again. Because even if had to do it sitting down, I could still share my stories, and that was important. So I was able to continue doing what I wanted to do in my work with a lot of support. But I could have stopped right then and there because it was at times overwhelming. But I knew again my values, what was important to me, and what I wanted to share. I had spent all these years, over 35 years, learning my craft and my art form, both of storytelling and in education, and I want to share that. So I was able to overcome that. This year is a great example. I was busy, I had a full schedule, I was doing all the work that I really loved, both for children and adults. You mentioned that I was a Chautauqua scholar. I know it's a hard word. You're reading, going, what is this? It just basically means that I do both the research as well as the speaking engagements. So I do historical portrayals where I actually tell real women's stories in the first person, as well as history of my state and other histories through the art of storytelling. But all of a sudden, I found I had all this work, and mid March, like so many others, it stopped because of COVID-19 and the pandemic. But I have to tell you, it just meant that I had to learn to do it in another way, just as we're doing it now. The good part is, while I was no longer able to travel like I did before, up till mid March, now I can travel even easier without leaving the comfort of my own home and my sofa. By the by, as I'm sitting here in my house, this is actually the same house that I spent every summer in. I now live in what had been my grandparents' house that they built in the mid 1950s, telling some of the very same stories that I learned from them and passing it on. Talk about coming full circle. So it's all about whatever obstacles we have along the way, looking at it, learning from them, and looking at it as challenges rather than ways that block us. Sometimes we are forced to go around, sometimes we're forced to go over, or even through them. But we can get to where we want to go. And I am, and I'm working probably just as much as I was before, I'm very happy to say, but it's all virtual for right now.
Exactly. The virtual world has changed the entire world. It's become more closer. It's become more.
And it's made it easier for us to have these conversations, Ms. Marina.
And have you made any kind of serious sacrifices to be wherever you are today?
Of course. I think we make our choices. Now, there may be sacrifices, but I was very conscious of what I was doing. I learned figure out where you want to go. It's really hard to get someplace if you don't know where you're going. And sometimes we don't. Like, for example, when I decided I am going to be a storyteller, I knew where I wanted to go. I had no idea how to get there. But because I had actually a very clear cut idea of how it could be used and why I wanted to do this, I knew why, and I still do. It's to conectar, to connect us uno al otro, one to another. That same grandfather, Grandpa Nat, is the one who taught me that if you don't know the forest, you can get lost in the trees. It's an old Siberian saying, but if you don't know the stories, you can get lost in life. He's also the one that always reminded me it's hard to hate someone whose story you know. That's very important to me because, again, we have obstacles and things that stand in our way, and we need to know where we want to go in order to get there. And I have often been the outsider, not only in a career that people didn't quite understand. Storyteller, what do you do? I don't get that quite as much as I used to. And children have never asked me that. They understood exactly. But I do get the question. They wanted to know, what do you mean you're a storyteller and how do you make a living from that? But I've also known, or a teaching artist. Well, we know what a teacher is and we know what an artist is. What is that? And I understand the confusion. But a lot of it for me is being able to connect people's minds and hearts and languages and cultures because it really is hard to hate someone whose story you know. And I've often been the outsider as a Jewish girl growing up, as an English-speaking American living in Mexico, as a mother. We always, for one reason or another, will feel as an outsider at one point or another. How do we connect us one to another? And I like people, and I like connecting us because I like to see viewpoints that are different from my own. And I want to share some of mine that you might not have thought about, because then at least we'll share ideas. I may not agree with you, but I might. But I like to learn something new each and every day. And the best way I know to do that is by connecting people one to another. Did that answer?
Yes. I was lost in your answer.
I get lost in the story oftentimes, I have to tell you, but it's because it's very important to me. I really am about connecting people because that's what I like to do. I like people. I like talking with you. I like talking to your listeners. I don't actually see you there in front, but I can imagine that you are there. And if we ever get that chance, I would like to be able to listen to your stories because it's not just telling mine. I want
Exactly.
to hear your stories as well. It's what my grandmother taught me. In a story, we could actually travel around the world back in time into outer space, as we did in the interview yesterday. Still make
Yesterday.
it back in time for supper. What a great way of doing that.
Have there been any lowest times in your life when you wanted to just give up and move and not take it back again? Or a moment when you thought, now it's enough, I cannot take it anymore?
I think we all do that. You talked about the sacrifices. One of the sacrifices I had to make was, for a long time, I didn't make a lot of money doing this. It's a struggle sometimes. I still needed to make a living. My husband and I both had to work, and my children were young. And when my children were young, part of the sacrifice I made was, in order to become a more successful storyteller, I would have to travel, and I didn't. I didn't do a lot of it because my husband was working 18-hour days as an electrician and in construction here in Florida. And we made the sacrifice of monetary sacrifice of where I would only work part time doing that, honing my craft still, but at least when they were out of school, I would be home with them and not traveling so that my husband can also work some of those hours. And I would do it on the weekends that he might be home or during the school days where I could work in the schools when my children were in school. So that was certainly a sacrifice on it. And there are times you wonder, why am I doing this? I could get another job, and I was offered jobs even at their school to work during those things, and maybe that would have been better. But I knew what my passion was. Even this year, when all of a sudden now we had a switch from a format that I knew and was successful in, all of a sudden work dried up. And now we had to do it virtually, or I had to learn to do videos. And I didn't have the proper equipment for it. I didn't have lighting or the cameras or know from that or film editing. I did tell my children, please, even though I'm still doing it on my tombstone, please do not put film editor at all. Mm-mm. Storyteller, educator, but not film editor. I'm doing it because I have to. And I remember just this last May, I had videos that were due. Everybody wanted a little bit of this, and I was overwhelmed. I'm learning new technology. I'm worried about our health. I can't go on. I'm doing all of this from home. And I didn't have the proper equipment or even the knowledge at that time. And I went, that's it. I am done. I can't do this anymore. I had all these videos that were done. It's different than Zoom. Zoom, at least, I had some experience with because I had done some worldwide webinars previous to the pandemic, but not making videos on my own or editing them. And I said, that's it. I quit. I'm not going to do this anymore. But my husband, he made me a nice hot cup of tea, gave me some crochet so that I could sit there and create something that night. And after a good night's sleep, I woke up the next morning and went, I'm ready to start again. But we all have those moments. That's when we need to take a breath. My mother taught me, another really wise woman, to pretend there's a flower and smell the flower, and then blow out the candle in order to calm ourselves and focus. It's called pursed lip breathing because we're blowing out the candle or pretend you're blowing bubbles. It works very well if you're having breathing problems or COPD, which she had later in life. Ironically, she had used that as an educator much earlier on, and it helped her later in life as well. But I use this as a daily reminder to stop and take a breath and then stop and figure out the problem. And that's the great thing about being a storyteller. In every story, there has to be a problem if you don't have a story. Then you just need to figure out the solution. And that's probably why scientists like Einstein, that I keep mentioning, use stories in their teaching. Einstein used to tell riddle stories in his classes at Princeton to get his students to stop and think and look at problems from a different perspective.
I think that is what and how we connected.
Exactly. Exactly.
Have there been incidents or moments when you were moving towards a particular direction but ended up somewhere else and that brought a change in your life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as I was talking about, I went to Mexico not to study storytelling. As a matter of fact, they had no idea at the college what to make of me. I thought I was going down there because I wanted to learn a second language, as my grandmother was my inspiration. She already spoke 6 languages at that point, and I was only fluent in English. I didn't know how to read and write in Hebrew, but unfortunately, we had never learned it as conversational, and so I went to Mexico um, in part to learn a second language, but in part because it almost felt like it was fate. I had been planning to study up in northern United States. I wanted to go to Massachusetts. And I had everything ready, but when I was looking at colleges, everything seemed to point in a different direction to Mexico. And I have no idea why. I had never been there. I had never, no connection there. I had actually gone, by the time I did, one time on vacation, and I felt very at home. It was strange. But it never occurred to me to go to Mexico. I was going to go up north and maybe even to Canada, where I had relatives too. My family all came from Eastern Europe. But when we came to the United States, it was only my immediate family, my grandparents. My parents were actually born in the United States. But the rest had all escaped the pogroms of Poland, Russia, in either to Canada, most of them, and then one family actually in Mexico. But I did not even consider going there. I was going up north. But everything seemed to point me in a different direction, and I followed it. And then when I decided, my mother said, maybe you should try, see what would happen. And I did. But you never knew that wasn't part of the plan. Then I ended up in Mexico and decided I'm going to be a storyteller. That was not what I had planned either. So many times in my life, that may not be the direction I thought I was going here. But if we're open to it, taking those opportunities to see maybe that is what we need to do. My mother once told me, again, she's a very smart woman, rarely do people ever regret things that they've done. More often, they regret things that they never did and never tried. And she told me, do not live a life of regret. And I've tried very hard to live up to that. So oftentimes, I thought I was going over here, made the detour, and that detour was actually the direction that I really needed to go into. So sometimes we just need to stop, take that breath, and follow where we wanted. I had not planned on becoming a teaching artist, though I always knew my art form of storytelling would be very effective in it. And I've always been interested in sharing, which to me is what education is about, ideas and knowledge. And that's what I can do through stories. And I still love doing it. Whether it's teaching the youngest language and rhyme, rhythm, repetition, and literacy skills, or adults about the history of our state or our country, or new ideas or riddles to see things in a new perspective. I love being able to connect with people, which is why I'm a storyteller.
And that's what makes you Carrie Sue.
Thank you.
Uh, have you been doing few things which were planned in a very different way, but they went into a different direction, and that was better for you?
This is really interesting. I actually do this almost on a daily basis, um, because you have to be prepared. I'm also still a scout. I've been part of Boy Scouts of America for over 30 years now. So I'm a scout, and the motto is be prepared, because you will often find you plan something, but that's not what it really needs to go into. And if you're aware and in the moment, you'll be able to make those directions. So, for example, my lesson plans will have built in different ideas. I overplan, which is okay. So even if I only have this amount of time, I might, in the middle of the lesson, have to veer off because that's where they needed to hear or what they needed to learn. And if you're open to that, you'll be prepared for it. So, for example, just recently I was doing some lesson plans for early childhood, the youngest of children, 3 and 4 year olds. And at the bottom of it, which I show for the teachers, because part of it is professional development for the teachers in these particular lessons, I will have additional little rhymes and songs to go with what my goal was. I will always set where my pathway is. What is my goal? Where do I want to go? But how I get there can be very, very different. And I will actually add extras if we need to have time. And if we don't need it then, I will not have to use it. Or, for example, in my storytelling programs, I will have different ideas, but I don't always have a set program. I'm going to do this story and this story, especially if it's a public performance where I don't know who the audience will be. If it's in a school, I'll know the grade level. But if I go to an audience and they may be a library show, for example, I don't know who's going to show up. So I'll have a lot of different ones. And I will oftentimes be told, oh, this is only going to be an adult audience. And I get there and there's families with young children and grandparents and middle schoolers. So I have to be ready. So when I first started, I actually had people telling me, oh, no, you're doing it all wrong. Oh, no, no. You have to know exactly which one you're going to tell. And I found out that following my own direction, my own way, being prepared for whoever might show up and looking and listening to them for what just the right story would be worked much better. But it means you have to be over prepared. But that's how I live my life on a daily basis so that whenever an obstacle comes up, there's a way around it. For example, if you're going someplace and there's a detour or the road gets shut down, which has happened to me, especially as I travel not just virtually, I had to figure out still the way to get there on time, early enough, and maybe it may be where I left a little bit early. So if there was some delay, I could get there. Or if when I got there, it was not what I expected. You'd have to be prepared for all of it. And that to me is the challenges, but also the opportunities in our lives. And so it's a way of looking at it. We're always going to have something that was not what we expected, but what do we do with it then? So take that breath. I also learned that as a teenager, the first time my father had cancer, for my 16th birthday, we had just discovered that my dad had a very aggressive oral cancer that he was not expected to survive. He was only in his 40s. And the night of my 16th birthday, we went out to a music concert, a wonderful Greek singer that I loved, Nana Mouskouri. And it was just my father, my mother, and I. It was a special night. And afterwards, we talked about what was coming next with his cancer. By the way, he did survive it. He was in that small group. He survived two more cancers, each one aggressive, each one telling his odds for survival were not great. But he overcame them. But I learned at 16 that life can be very fragile, to enjoy each moment of it and find the joy even in those obstacles. So I think that helped me too, because I didn't know what the outcome would be, as neither did my parents, of course, neither did my siblings, but we could sit there and do it together. So in those moments, I could decide what was important. And when I tell a story, I always decide what is important to me in the telling. Now, I will leave it up to you. I rarely will tell you what my moral of the story might be, because what you might need from the story might be different. But that's why we have to be prepared to change course and think, that's not where I thought I was going, but I needed to go here, and trust that as well. And those stories, what I might have needed at 10 years ago, might be different than what I need from it right now. So they're always evolving. They're live and in the moment, whether as a listener or as a teller.
Excellent, excellent. Like your stories are quite insightful. None of the stories are without any moral. And children and teachers and adults, everybody learn from them. Through your stories, you have touched a huge number of people's lives. You have been touching their heart, you've been touching their soul, their lives. Any incident relating to these stories that you can remember that really changed your life when you came to know that somebody's life has been touched by any of your stories?
That's so interesting. I have an imaginary, what I call my heart pocket. It's like a little envelope that I keep right here in my heart, and I can carry it like I do stories everywhere I go. And I trust it. I have more than I'm so grateful. I have more than enough to fill it up, and it keeps being added to. But I trust for every one of those stories that I still have an impact, and I hope a positive one along the way. But I've had enough feedback on it that it's full. Uh, I'll give you an example. A couple of years back, I was doing a residency in a school. Um, and I remember the very first day I told a story that my father-in-law, a folk tale from Mexico, one I've never seen written, that my father-in-law used to tell. And I told the story about this young girl, Floripa, who overcame obstacles, a very harsh and almost abusive childhood, living under the witch's domain. But she overcame it because she knew that in her heart that she had once had a mother, had once been loved, that she had strength within her. And the name of the project that we were doing was called The Warrior Within. We were teaching poetry and how to create your own poems and perform them. Now, when I started this, I started the very first day telling that story. As I said, this folk tale my father-in-law had told me. What I did not know is that in that class, there was a young man, I believe it was fourth grader at the time, third or fourth grader, and he had just started back at school. His brother had been murdered shortly before. His older brother, it was an immigrant family. They had moved here from Haiti, and his brother was a rising star, a football star at the University of Miami. Brilliant, the first one to go to college here, and he had been senselessly murdered. I remember reading the case about it, but I did not know he had a younger brother and that that young man was in my class. I had no idea. I did not know until 2 years later, after we had finished this 6 month long project and he had gone off now to middle school. I was invited to a breakfast to celebrate the art forms that we do here in Miami, Arts for Learning, and a breakfast for brilliance. And they were having some of the children who had been through our programs, some of the music programs and the dance, and this young man who they invited back to speak. And I said, yes, I would love to come. He had asked for me specifically. I said, well, that's wonderful. I came, and that's when I found his story. That's when I found out that 2 years before, when he was in my class, it was his first day back at school, and he didn't want to be there. He was so depressed and so upset, as you can imagine. It was not only his older brother who was his idol, and he said he was in a deep, dark hole, and he saw no light and no hope. He did not want to be there. But I'm quoting him now. He said, when Miss Carrie Sue started to speak, she started to tell the story about a girl named Floripa, who also had been through such pain and horror. And it was almost like a light started to appear at the very top of a very tall, deep well. And as she spoke, the light got stronger, and I was able to pull myself out. Well, as he's speaking, the tears are streaming down my heart and my face. He told me afterwards, he said, did you see? I remembered everything you taught me. You see, I remembered to have hope. I remembered how to stand, how to breathe when I got nervous, how to find my position of power to tell my story. And I have to tell you, through tears, I had no words to thank him for that. For whenever I am tired or wonder why am I doing this? Why am I getting up so early or traveling or driving myself crazy to do this work? I think of that young man. Or I think about where you don't know where the story will bring a smile or hope to those that need it. I remember one time I was leaving Miami Book Fair, a big festival that we have here, and I actually went back. I had left something in the tent, and a mother and her mother and a young child, her daughter, were all walking by, and they stopped. Now, the young lady was now grown, and she was an author, and she stopped me. She said, you're the storyteller, aren't you? Well, I thought they hadn't seen me at my performance earlier that day, and it turned out no. She was there because she was with her mother, and now they were signing books, and she was there with her daughter. She said, no, you came to my school, and she named the school 20 years before, when she had been in elementary school. And she said, and you told that story. Remember, you told the story about the tortillas. She not only remembered me, recognized me, she remembered the story that she had listened to one afternoon in a school program 20 some years before. Yes, I know why I continue doing this. So when things get hard, and I do sometimes wonder, like last spring when do I really want to continue doing this in a new format? I know why. My imaginary heart pocket, my envelope is full.
Great, great. Your words are like anybody can sit and listen to whatever you say for hours and hours and hours.
Thank you.
Even though ladies are not allowed to mention their age, but even at this, even after having grandchildren, what is it that keeps your spirit so high?
Well, a grandchild certainly helps. One of the benefits of this pandemic, believe it or not, is that I have gotten to have spend many of the days with my grandson. I have a 3-year-old grandson who lives only a few minutes away from me, and he's part of my inner circle because I am not going out and not performing live. Um, but when I'm not working, I am working via the internet, obviously, or videos. Uh, in between, my daughter works luckily from home too. In between, I will watch my grandson who lights up my life. And I get to practice all of these stories with him. He's a little storyteller as well. And I know that the impact on education, so he's just 3 years old, but his verbal skills are very, very good. He speaks 2 languages now. His math skills are phenomenal. He can count in English and Spanish and loves counting everything. But he knows how to think. He'll do problem solving because we do it through a story. He's already starting to read, and he just turned 3 in December. He loves decoding things or making things up. For example, we will be playing just like the other day where the big bad wolf came to the house knocking at the door, and he will change the story and remake it so that instead of just blowing the wolf away, he might become a whale and spout water and give the wolf a bath. And he said to me, wolves don't like bubble baths, Grandma. So I find this, it inspires me. But the other thing that inspires me is making those connections with my listeners, just like with you, or teaching a new skill in school. I'm working on some just this week, which will be teaching English language arts to first graders. And in a couple of weeks, I will be doing math and science lessons with them. In December, I did a math and science lessons with first graders in 7 different schools. I had a lot of different classrooms via the internet, obviously. It was virtual, not in person. But it was wonderful to watch as through a story and laughing and fun, they were adding to their math skills. They were adding to their science curriculum when they had to figure out which ones are living and which ones are not and why. Or what makes this, what kind of animal is this? Because they had to look, oh, this one has feathers, but this one has fur. Is a bat which flies a bird or a mammal? What makes you say this? That thinking, when you see those little lights go on, it fills my soul and I'm re energized again and again. And when I get tired, and I do, I'll take that deep breath. And those are the moments when I remember these things from my heart pocket or what's right in front of me when I see the excitement, when a child cannot wait to read a book or to find out more in the story or to stop and think. That's what keeps me going. Because it's not just one skill or another, it's that combination. And that's why I really love arts integration, where they're not separate, they're meshed together in one single lesson. Because that's what our stories can do. Whatever art form we have, whether you're painting your story or dancing your story or telling your story. But tell your story, it's important. It's, as again, hard to hate someone whose story you know. It's important to tell your story because it's individual and to listen. Whether it's a child of 3 or a senior at 93, they have so much that we can share one to another because we each have different experiences in our lives, whether we're living in different cultures with different languages or even in the same house. Because if you'll talk to siblings, I'm blessed to have my siblings, we don't have the same experiences, even living in the same house. to listen to one another.
That's the most important thing. Now, what and how do you feel while you are training our teachers, being the mentor of teacher training at our Seas Global Institute? How do you feel, and what do you feel is the future of Seas Global Institute?
I'm actually a part of this because I'm very excited about this project. Seas Global Institute uh, is, I think, coming at an amazing time. It's when we really need it in so many different ways, but it's not just for this moment. One of the reasons I wanted to do the training with the teachers is because I have learned a lot over the last 45 years of being a storyteller and certainly as a teaching artist. But it's also so I want to share that, but I learned from your teachers as well. Sharing these ideas and getting excited in that moment is really key because that excitement, that interest carries over to our students always. So the number one goal was I wanted to see what your teachers' needs were and how I could fulfill that because I really get great satisfaction from being able to help teachers be the best. You know, we spoke earlier about how one really good teacher will influence us for the rest of our lives. It might be that art teacher that helped us see things in a different way. I don't have to be a visual artist. I may not be able to paint more than a flower that kind of looks like a flower-ish. Or with my grandson, I'm learning definitely to draw dragons and dinosaurs and unicorns because he asks me on a daily basis. And they just have to look unicorn-ish, the close enough. But I have to be able to try it and to be able to share with what they need in that moment so they can best share with their students. And Seas Global Institute is meeting that needs because you are using integrally the arts forms in with it so you make lessons interesting and informative. We need to know meet where they're at and then push them to go even farther. We want our students to think. So if I can help your teachers in any way to find a different way to maybe using my art form, the art of storytelling, and to use it through voice and expression, whether they're going to be doing it in a story about science or doing it to teach language arts or just to have fun while they're doing something. We want to be able to share that because if the students are interested, you know they're going to follow it up and ask questions. My nickname growing up in high school was the letter Y. Well, of course, the real reason was because it was my favorite question. It still is. I ask why on all of it. And sometimes it's hard. Why is the sky blue? Let's look it up. That's what I told my children. Why do you think that character did that? There may not be one single answer, and that's okay. We want them to question, to think, to learn, and to grow. Because I think, like my grandmother learning Spanish at age 92, there's no upper age limit on learning and growing. And one of the satisfactions I get as I give, but I'm also learning each and every time I tell a story or interact with a school child or their teachers. And I really think that Seas Global Institute has that as part of your integral core mission is to keep on growing and learning. And that is very, very exciting. And for me, hope for the future.
Thank you so much for your kind words. You are inspiration for all our teachers, and especially for me, because whenever I am stuck somewhere, I count upon you. So
I'm really glad to hear that because we do need one another. We don't go through life, hopefully, solo, alone. Even as some of us are separated into our homes by ourselves, we are not alone. If we're lucky, we have somebody else we can reach on. And we know that we have that support, which is what our histories are all about. We're standing on the shoulders of so
yeah.
many others. And I'm very cognizant and grateful for it each and every day. I could not do this by myself, nor would I want to. and being able to meet you this year and this project has me very excited. I know that there's hope, that there are others with the same vision. So thank you very much.
In fact, thank you for accepting to be in my team. And I'm really proud of our Seas Global Institute team. And we are working day and night to take it ahead. And that is how we connect. We all are hardworking people, and we will definitely make it a big, big success someday.
Absolutely. It's a phenomenal team. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be a part of it.
Thank you so much for being there. Namaste. Here we end our session. Tomorrow we will be back with Miss Thekla Mutero from Namibia. She also has a very, very inspiring and motivational story. See you tomorrow. Until then, namaste and good night.